Welcome to the Miami Corona Project Conversations. Today, I'm honored to be speaking with an attorney, uh, Matthew Dietz, a founding member and current litigation director of Disability Independence Group, a nonprofit law firm. He has been practicing in the arena of civil rights litigation since 1996 and has handled hundreds of matters involving the Americans with Disabilities Act. Mr. Dietz represents victims of discrimination in administrative, trial, and appellate proceedings and has over 300 reported decisions. In his career, Mr. Dietz has worked to redefine effective communication, reasonable accommodation, and expand the rights and opportunities of persons with disabilities. In 2019, Dietz was awarded the ABA Paul G. Hearn Award for performing exemplary service in furthering the rights, dignity, and access to justice for people with disabilities. Mr. Dietz, it's a true honor to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking your time. I know that there are many people, including a lot of folks in the media, who seek your wisdom and want to speak to you. And I'm happy that you agreed to collaborate with me in this conversation, part of the University of Miami's COVID-19 rapid response effort to capture, to assess, to address what is happening with COVID-19, with this pandemic in Miami, and to capture in real time what's going on. And I just wanted to first start by asking you, how are you? How has this pandemic personally affected you, your friends, your family? How has it changed, your reality here in Miami as an individual?
Well, all of my employees are working from home, other than my four-legged litigation assistant to my right. She comes to work with me every day, but essentially I have ensured that everybody could work from home. So we're still taking calls and we're still trying to work as hard as possible. And a lot of the litigation that we work on has been paused. A lot of my clients are also friends, and some of them have passed away based upon COVID.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Are in long-term care facilities. So it's a trying time.
It is indeed a trying time. I think that any society is measured by the way we treat the most vulnerable among us. And during this pandemic, I have seen the value of life been placed in the same scale as economic security and the opening of our nation. And there's a feeling among some that some will just have to be sacrificed for the better good. And I can't think of a sicker, most disgusting approach to life or to ordered society than that. And I know that in many ways, you and your firm fight on better days to protect those with disabilities. But I think that this pandemic has exacerbated the divide and the lack of awareness for us to live in society, beholden to each other, responsive to each other, creating mores and rules and regulation and law that protects us from one another. And I just wanted you to tell me a little bit about how this pandemic has exposed those vulnerabilities that existed within the disability community and what it is that you have done. I know there's a couple of recent cases that you have fought at the federal and state level to address COVID issues with your clients. I'm just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about present day. What's the reality with the people with disabilities and this pandemic? Of course, in many ways, people with disabilities are people who may have conditions that make them even more vulnerable to the pandemic itself, to the disease, to the virus. So if you could just talk to me a little bit about that, or the access that they lack because of new policies that are being implemented.
Sure. The big difference between the pandemic and a normal disaster like a hurricane is, with a hurricane, there's always pre-planning. People with disabilities have plans. They know the shelter to go to. They know to get the medication in advance. There's a lot of things that people are used to doing. They know where their dogs go, where their pets go, how they're going to get food, how they're going to get transportation. Because of this pandemic and the lack of planning, persons with disabilities were forgotten, essentially. And there's been a lot of movements both locally and across the country in how they've been forgotten. One of the first issues that's been happening across the country was the bioethics of who gets equipment first, whether it's ventilators, whether it's life-saving equipment, and this was done based solely on the fear and the concern that there weren't going to be enough ventilators, or that persons with disabilities were going to get their ventilators taken away if they used them on a day-to-day basis. And some states have actually come up with rules that evaluate a person's life as in their possible remaining life years left. So it's not whether or not they could overcome the current illness. It's more of how many good years they have left. And that's a very sad way and utilitarian way to value other people in our community. After this had started, the Department of Health and Human Services came out with guidance that basically said that you cannot treat people differently because of their disability. And the disabilities were things like cerebral palsy, dementia, other issues that may not have a direct effect, or may have a direct effect, but still people will be able to get better. But even though the Department of Health and Human Services did come out with that guidance, states still proceeded in developing the bioethics guidelines. Now, when that first came out, I was more concerned about folks actually getting tested, because if people aren't getting tested, what happens is they don't even get to the hospital. They die at home. If they're stuck in isolation or segregation in a long-term care facility, they're going to die in the long-term care facility. So currently now we have over 35% of the deaths nationwide are from people in long-term care facilities. Over 50% of the deaths nationwide are people over 60. A lot of folks that are among the dead, or among the ones that aren't being cared for, are folks that aren't even getting tested. So you get into the situation when folks aren't getting tested, you don't even know whether or not they are ill. And part of the problem is the first testing that comes out is either drive-through or walk-through testing.
Yeah, so and people with disabilities have access issues. How do they find them? Yeah,
they can't get to them.
Right.
So when that came out, the first thing that I did is I got together with Disability Rights Florida, and we started demanding that the South Florida counties start providing at-home testing. Under the ADA, when you have a program or service, you have to provide the program and service to folks with disabilities in an equal fashion. So if you have a program, you can't have it in a place that persons with disabilities can't get to. So they have to have a part of the program that goes to the person with a disability. Miami-Dade implemented it almost immediately upon being asked, which was great. Yeah. Broward took about a month. Palm Beach has started to train their folks to do it. And they are doing it with folks that have signed on before in shelters. So if they signed up for hurricane shelters during a hurricane, they would call them up and ask them if they would like to be tested. But they promise on doing it, opening it up soon. But there are other counties throughout Florida that haven't done it yet, like Volusia County and Duval County, even though many of these deaths occur to folks that are homebound, they're not being served. So then and also I get calls from folks that are clients or folks that want to be clients, and there's some hospitals that are not providing people that are deaf or deaf-blind interpreters because they're not allowing for them to have interpreters in the hospital where the interpreters could catch the virus. But again, it's a requirement, and interpreters could do the same PPEs as folks that are doctors or nurses. So a lot of folks that are deaf-blind or deaf are not getting accommodations. And in addition, there's no reason why they shouldn't get accommodations at testing facilities as well. Now, most of our public officials are using interpreters for their emergency services, but the president isn't. So folks that are deaf are not going to be able to understand what the president says and are going to hear it secondhand or third hand. So you're getting that issue. Then there are issues about there's no reason why in our society we're having people tested in Fisher Island, in Ball Harbor, in Coral Gables. The cities are paying for them to be tested, yet we're not getting testing in assisted living facilities, skilled nursing facilities, and group homes or home health aides. These are the folks that are most at risk, and they're the folks that should get tested first.
And the people who work at those facilities who could be bringing it from the outside without any symptoms, asymptomatic carriers. Why is that? Why such a failure, an absolute failure at our state level with this testing? What is going on? Why is this happening?
Well, New York just passed a rule where folks that work in nursing homes have to be tested twice weekly. Part of it is the claim that there's not sufficient testing, but I feel that if there's sufficient testing to test those in Fisher Island, Ball Harbor, and Coral Gables, there's sufficient testing to test those that are most vulnerable. And then you have the additional issues about the type of testing.
Right.
Group homes that have folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities, sometimes it is very difficult to test those folks with the nose swab. Mm-hmm. It's uncomfortable, and it's difficult to test somebody that has an intellectual and developmental disability that has behavioral issues by sticking a 6-inch Q-tip up their nose. There should be other ways to test these folks as well. But it's difficult to understand the priority our society places on testing folks that are more at risk than folks that could afford to provide testing for themselves. And as for the reason, it's because we don't value these folks as people in our society. And on top of that, when the legislature and the governor is considering immunizing folks to any liability for COVID-19 issues, you really are getting into a situation in which you're not testing, you're not evacuating these folks from long-term facilities or in-home, and you're not providing them care. And then on top of it, you're saying that we really didn't have to do it in any event because these lives are worthless. We're going to immunize folks from not doing the basic precautions we need. So if you
it feels like so many of these ancient era things in the history of disabilities, Sparta, Rome, the early days of Just and you know some recent history too. Let's not get carried away and romanticize who we are as a society. But it just sort of seems that the inequities, the discrimination, the um, the lack of respect for others who you feel may be different to you has been exposed in ways by the way you're describing right now in our society. And I just know that in the future we're going to have tougher pandemics and tougher challenges. Climate change is letting us know that the more we warm our planet, the more animals that would not be able to be vectors of disease in the tropics come to the tropics. The more we develop into wilderness, the more animals that would have not interacted with humans can now provide human um, animal human transmission. And I just worry about what the future of pandemics is going to look like in our society writ large, and with a particular focus on those who are the most vulnerable, people with disabilities. And I want to thank you for the work you're doing in the present, and I can see by the work you've done to try to have people with disabilities tested at home, the work that you and your law firm has done by making sure that condo associations do not block caretakers for caring for disabled individuals in their own condos, the work that you're doing through your advocacy and you're speaking out in the media, but also to public officials to make sure that people with disabilities aren't left behind, is how you're focusing on that in this present pandemic that we have not adequately prepared for. I'm wondering what voice you, as an attorney who can help, you know, through the courtroom, help us change structures, but also as a civic leader who, through the power of your voice, can shine a light on where some darkness lives. How do we, after this pandemic is behind, whether it's 18 months or 36 months from now, how do we do better as we prepare for future pandemics and future crises? What can we do structurally within our governance, within our system, to make sure that no one's left behind?
Well, we should do what we do with hurricanes. We should have adequate planning. There shouldn't be another emergency order that adds that we are trying to catch up with the pandemic. There should be things that are in place to begin with, especially when it comes to long-term care facilities. And long-term care facilities, we know that in our state that most don't even have, I mean, not most, many don't even have generators yet,
Yeah.
even after the hurricane. So it's hard to say that we're really going to be prepared if something happens next. The issue that you have, and historically, as you go back, is that people view the rights of persons with disabilities more as a measure of charity
Mm-hmm.
than as a requirement to treat everybody equally. It's a convenience, whether it's transportation, whether it's housing, whether it's life in this case. And when society views it as too costly, it seems to be the first thing to go. So we just have to be on the street corners yelling and screaming that these folks are still here, and these
That
folks
we're
are,
all equal. That we're all equal. That we're all equal. Right.
and
That's
that these
the.
are our parents and brothers and children and sisters, and they all deserve a right. And it's difficult when we're getting into numbers like 70,000 and 80,000 and 90,000, not to think of people as numbers, but actual human beings.
Yeah. Are there any new information you may have as to what's happening with testing in adult congregate living facilities and ALFs and nursing homes and group homes? Is there, I mean, clearly those, especially the, you know, the smaller ones, where there may not be as much clinical oversight. I'm just wondering about the infection rates and even if the deaths are reported as COVID-19 deaths, if there's underreporting because, you know, someone died of a heart attack. I mean, I'm just wondering if you have any data or any insight into where we are today in Miami-Dade County. I read the numbers every single day from the health department and look at our county numbers. 5 people died yesterday. I'm wondering if every death is being counted in that number of every person. And I know that it's a novel virus, that there are people who may have died of strokes or heart attacks that no one knew it was related to the virus. And now we're listening that it may be impacting children as well in ways that we had not known before. Again, we're learning as we grow, and we're learning how it gets transmitted. We're learning a lot along the way. I'm just wondering if you're satisfied with the numbers that you see our state reporting on the Department of Health website.
No. I think the issue with the regulations and rules on long-term care facilities are changing by the week. Every week, currently, there are new rules, emergency regulations coming out. New ones came out this past week. I don't think that they're sufficient. I think that they need to be expanded to all congregate care facilities and not just skilled nursing facilities. I think that many congregate care facilities cannot handle folks that are this sick and should be immediately transferred to a hospital, just like they're doing in New York.
New York, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that things are changing every day. But also the CDC is, I apologize.
It's adorable. Thank you.
The CDC is also comparing the regular deaths for this time of year to the historical ones to what's happening now, and they come out with numbers every 2 weeks. So once we find out how we compare to what's happening historically, we're going to have a better idea of how many of the deaths would have happened but for the coronavirus. So I think that it's going to be a big difference. We're going to find out a big difference about what's actually happening and other illnesses that folks have. And also, you're getting to the issues about home health care people probably are not showing up to all of their shifts.
Right.
Your paratransit in Miami-Dade County essentially broke down, other than the fact that if you have a critical medical appointment such as dialysis or chemotherapy, you really can't get paratransit. So folks are essentially homebound. And then on top of that, you're going to have a major issue of depression that's going to arise from this as well. So there's many associated issues, not even the fact that a person may not get help for a heart attack, but also, and be afraid to go to the hospital, but also the fact that people aren't going to be able to get the normal assistance they get, are going to get hurt by a multitude of other things because of all of the ancillary issues that could have happened. I mean, how about people that check up on their elderly parents or grandparents and can't do it now?
Right.
So it's there. There's going to be a part of there's going to be deaths that occur because of the COVID virus, but then there are going to be the other issues because of the lack of care and the lack of services to that population.
Yeah, I know that that when we get out of this, there's going to be a lot of people who didn't do preventive health care, who didn't take care of themselves, who were too scared to go visit a doctor, who couldn't have access to visit a doctor, and as you said, who weren't cared for. I also hope that when we come out on the other side, that all of the socialization that we are accustomed to and now are conditioned not to engage in doesn't manifest itself in ugly ways. I know that there's a history of folks in our society being dismissive to people with disabilities, and that's a reality that happened in the not too distant decades, right? And little by little, through programs in schools where instead of having the kids isolated from other kids in populations and segregated, that it was how do we bring and integrate communities. And I just know that there's a lot of changes happening across our society. You're focused on the really critical ones. I think there's also nuanced issues, you know, people who aren't policymakers and people who aren't health workers, but all of us need to remain vigilant and understand that we are all one, that we are all equal, and that we need to create this sense of community and empathy for all of us. And I just know that in times like this, when everyone's so concerned about their own personal health and making sure that they're going to be okay, that there needs to be a bigger openness. And of course, places like pandemics let us know of that. Those nursing homes that, or those group facilities that we don't care for. It's not just clearly that by testing there, we make sure that less people get infected across our society that impact us. But for the love of the people in those facilities, we have to care enough for them as individuals, because they're no lesser because they're not as vocal or as seen. And it's just so wonderful to have lawyers like you amplify their voices, elevate them, elevate their spirit, but elevate their rights so that they're not forgotten. And I thank you and your law firm for everything you're doing. I know it's going to be a hard road ahead of you these coming months. I can't wait to see what you and your firm do after we get out of this to create some of those structural changes. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right. And goodbye.
Yeah. She's been a good girl.
Good girl. All right. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you.
Take care.